The Rules Committee will come to order. This is a historic day. This afternoon, we are considering the Senate-passed version of the American Rescue Plan. We are on the verge of sending a bill to the President that will help our nation crush the COVID pandemic. It will put more vaccines in arms, put more kids back safely in schools, put more money in people's pockets, and put more people back to work. There are many transformational provisions here, including a landmark child care allowance and programs that will help cut childhood poverty in half. All told, this bill represents the largest anti-poverty effort in a generation. I am incredibly proud of what we have crafted. I want to thank President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris and my colleagues on both sides of the Capitol for their leadership in getting us to this point. For the first time in a long time, I can look my neighbors in the eye and tell them that we are passing a bill that truly meets all the challenges we face with this pandemic. It is my hope we can now move quickly to send this to the President so that all communities and all Americans can get the help that they desperately need. Now let me turn this over to our ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And we are once again considering a deeply partisan budget reconciliation bill. I said most of what I had to say on this package 2 weeks ago. It will come as no surprise to you, and that I do not believe that the package as a whole has been meaningfully improved by its trip to the Senate. Thankfully, the Schumer Bridge and the Pelosi rail projects have been removed from this bloated spending bill. Unfortunately, just as it was 2 weeks ago, today's package is still filled with far too many items completely unrelated to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's no exaggeration to say that the majority is using this crisis to pass their progressive policy wish lists into law, using the so-called relief package as the vehicle. I wish I had better things to say about the package that spends $1.9 trillion, and I wish I could tell the American people that every single dollar will meaningfully improve their lives, but unfortunately neither is the case. Though every member can likely find something they like in this package, it is so laden with unfocused, untargeted, and misdirected priorities that the package as a whole is simply untenable. I expect that every single Republican in the House feels the same, just as they did 2 weeks ago when first called upon to consider this bill. I would like to remind my friends of what we can accomplish when we work together. Last year, Republicans and Democrats came together 5 times to deliver bipartisan COVID relief packages to the American people, spending just shy of $4 trillion. Yet one of the very first actions taken by the majority, despite calls for bipartisanship by President Biden, was to write a bill that went so far to the left, that went as far to the left as they could go by developing a massive and bloated partisan spending package, failing to allow Republicans any input at all into drafting it, and then claiming that Republicans are being partisan for refusing to fall in line and support it. I will say this: on its trip over to the Senate, at least I think it's become clearer what the bill really is. And you can measure that by the rhetoric one hears. When Senator Sanders calls it the most progressive piece of legislation he's ever voted for, that's going to be understandably a red flag to Republicans. When the president's press secretary calls it a progressive bill of historic proportions, that too is not likely to breed much bipartisanship. So I'm not critical of my friends for doing this, but let's call it what it is. This is a deeply partisan bill that is far to the left. It's not a simple COVID relief bill similar to the 5 bills we worked together on last year and managed to pass together. We can do much better than that, Mr. Chairman. If the majority would only choose to do so, we could continue to work together to deliver real results for the American people. Today's package will likely pass on the floor and be signed into law. But if the majority continues down their present path of choosing partisanship over people, then we're likely to have disappointing results in bills that, frankly, cannot be passed by reconciliation. So not every priority can be jammed into a bill like this. And I urge my friends on the other side to rethink this course and work with Republicans for the betterment of our nation and its people. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks, and I would like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on the Senate amendment to H.R. 1319, the American Rescue Plan Act. Chairman Yarmouth and Ranking Member Smith, we're delighted that you are here. Without any objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of the hearing will be entered into the record. And Mr. Yarmouth, before I yield to you, I want to thank you for your leadership on this. I am very proud to be part of the effort to get this passed, and it will help a lot of my constituents and people all across the country. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern, and thank you for your work and leadership on this bill as well. Ranking Member Cole, nice to see you as well. Members of the committee. The bill before us today has been called one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in modern history. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 includes life-saving and life-changing provisions that will serve as a turning point in our nation's fight against COVID-19 and for a strong, inclusive economic recovery. The bill we are debating here today is largely unchanged from the one I first presented to this committee and was later passed by the House almost 2 weeks ago. The Senate changes were either peripheral or necessary to comply with Senate rules. Consequently, nearly every component of the House-passed American Rescue Plan, ending the pandemic, supporting families, small businesses, and communities through these crises, and helping workers and students safely return to their jobs and to schools, remains in this legislation. There's really nothing new to argue or debate here today. Between the budget resolution and the reconciliation bill itself, we have had more than 100 hours of debate in the House of Representatives, spanning Rules Committee hearings, committee markups, and multiple debates on the House floor, with another imminent. The Senate debated the resolution for nearly 15 hours and considered more than 800 amendments before taking more than 25 hours to pass the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 last week. Now it's back to us, where we will debate for a few more hours and vote before sending the bill to President Biden's desk to be signed into law. We have been thorough. We have followed every House rule and proper procedure for a budget reconciliation bill. But we have also acted with the urgency the situation requires. But ultimately, this has been a race against the clock, because we know the devastation that is happening in and to our communities every day. The American Rescue Plan is aggressive, no doubt about it. But researchers and health professionals have told us this is what is needed to scale up testing and tracing, to address PPE shortages, and to speed up equitable vaccine distribution so we can end this pandemic once and for all. Economic experts across the ideological spectrum support the American Rescue Plan. They agree that this targeted, evidence-based plan is needed, both for struggling families and for the American economy, and that the federal government has ample fiscal capacity to provide it. In fact, because of this legislation, economists estimate that we can bring the economy back to near full employment in a little over 12 months instead of 3 years as currently projected. But that's not all. We are providing direct financial relief to more than 80% of American families. We are lifting half of America's poor children out of poverty, and we are providing the resources schools need to open safely and to make up for lost time in the classroom. The American people get what we are doing. They know all too well the painful challenges facing our nation. And that is why the vast majority of them, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, support the American Rescue Plan. This is a momentous moment for this Congress, but more importantly for our nation and for American families. The American Rescue Plan will soon be signed into law, and help will be on the way. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity. Thank Ranking Member Cole. Let's be clear. The bailout we are discussing has little to do with COVID-19. So much of what is in this bailout is for the political class. It's not for the working class. Bailouts to states with no requirement, they end lockdowns. Billions to schools with no requirement, they open up for our kids. Obamacare expansions, a universal basic income, checks for prisoners and illegal immigrants. I mean, this bailout is a socialist wish list, chocked full of spending items unrelated to COVID. And the majority is doing it because they can. For all the backroom deal-making suspense that happened over the weekend in the Senate to get the bare minimum of support needed, the bailout remains largely the same one that received bipartisan opposition here in the House. The bailout still sends hundreds of billions to states, disproportionately states run by the president's political buddies, to reward and incentivize their lockdowns that have harmed working class Americans. They've destroyed jobs, shuttered numerous small businesses, and kept kids out of schools and parents on edge. The bailout still sends billions to schools with no requirement they follow the science and actually unlock their doors to our children. And honestly, it's hard to justify the money as emergency or needed to open up when it's spent over the course of a decade. A decade. The bailout still reflects the Democrats' socialist partisan political agenda. After all, less than only 9% of the bill goes towards crushing COVID-19 and putting shots in Americans' arms. The Congressional Budget Office has said, absent any new spending, real GDP is expected to return to pre-pandemic levels of growth this fiscal year. Unemployment is expected to continue to steadily decline over the next several years, and 2021 is projected to see the largest GDP growth in more than 15 years without one additional dollar of spending. Most states have reported they will actually not see any shortfall in revenues this year, and that even includes California. Yet the home state of Vice President Harris and Speaker Pelosi gets the largest windfall in this bailout. The state of California gets the largest windfall in this bailout. Happens to be Speaker Pelosi's home state and the Vice President's home state. So truthfully, what this plan is about, other than using a pandemic to enact a partisan agenda and bail out political buddies, is it to take credit for an economic recovery that the Congressional Budget Office tells us is already underway? So what is the Democrat majority doing? This bailout will hurt job creation. It drives up prices and be catastrophic for senior citizens. By passing this bailout, you alone, every one of you, by voting for this, will be responsible for triggering $36 billion. $36 billion in cuts to Medicare next year alone. With those same cuts to healthcare for seniors continuing year after year for the next decade, that is hundreds of billions in cuts to Medicare. You all are enacting hundreds of billions of cuts to our seniors just by your vote that you will be enacting. This is the wrong plan at the wrong time for all the wrong reasons. It ignores the bipartisan success of the past year, and it aims to achieve unity within one party rather than one country. Thank you. I yield back.
Okay. Well, let me be brief here. Today we are sending to the president's desk a bill that helps speed up vaccinations, helps reopen schools, gets money to people struggling to put food on the table, saves small businesses, and protects the jobs of our first responders and frontline workers. That's why we're here. To suggest that has nothing to do with this pandemic, I respectfully disagree. It has everything to do with this pandemic. And let me just say for the record that my friends on the other side of the aisle spent over $2 trillion on tax cuts, mostly for those who are well off and well connected. They didn't have a problem spending that money then, but apparently they have a problem when it's going to workers and not wealthy communities and not wealthy corporations. By the way, on the Medicare stuff, we addressed this in the last hearing, but apparently, I guess somebody has determined that it's a good talking point, but the statutory pay-as-you-go act cannot be addressed through reconciliation, and the gentleman knows that. As my friend knows, Congress has always stepped up to prevent statutory pay-go sequestration from occurring. And I hope my Republican colleagues will work with us to avoid a sequestration after we take this urgent action to help the American people, just as we have worked with them, just as we have worked with the Republicans to avoid sequestration after they cut taxes for millionaires and billionaires. So I have no questions other than to say that I will proudly vote for this bill because it will help struggling families in this country. It will help our small businesses. It will help get our kids back to school. It will help our first responders. So I am very, very happy with this, and I'm looking forward to going to the floor and speaking out in support of the bill and voting for it. I would like to yield to my friend, Mr. Cole, for any questions or comments he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few questions, a couple of quick comments, if I may. It's just simply not accurate to say Republicans aren't interested in sending money to help people in times of distress. The reality is we've worked together to pass 5 bills last year that collectively are twice as big as this bill. And almost every single Republican voted for that. But that relief was targeted and much more precise than this is. So we support that. And there's a lot of elements in this bill that we do support. We support the money for the vaccine. We support individual relief. I certainly voted for it in the last Congress. We weren't successful in getting the full measure in. And we certainly support, again, additional money in a variety of areas. But we don't support just money being spent literally years into the future, not being spent for the emergency. And I do think you're running significant risks of an inflationary pressure here. And that's not just a Republican opinion. That's Larry Summers. That's Steve Ratner. That's Mr. Perlstein of the Washington Post. These are a lot of liberal, democratic, respected economic thinkers that think you're running a big and unnecessary risk here. So, and that's what you've chosen to do. You have the votes to do it. I don't quibble with that. But again, when you're not going to get Republican votes when Bernie Sanders says this is the most progressive piece of legislation I've ever voted for in my entire congressional career. I mean, I actually appreciate that honesty. That's being honest. That's what this bill actually is. And that's why it's not garnering any Republican support. We could have gone a different way. The majority chose not to. That's perfectly your right to do it. I don't protest that at all. But please don't say that we somehow were against relief because we've demonstrated repeatedly that we weren't. Let me ask you, Mr. Smith, this bill did make a sojourn over to the Senate. Did it improve in any way? Did you see major changes in the Senate from the House bill?
Ranking member, this bill is still the wrong plan and the wrong time for all the wrong reasons. Like I said, the biggest items in there that's bailing out a lot of the political class instead of the working class, that's the issue. Like you said, we could come to an agreement on making sure the necessary healthcare spending that is there to put crushing the virus and putting shots in people's arms. But only 9%, less than 9% of the bills being used for that. And whenever you're seeing over $500 billion going to reward states and local governments that lock down their economies and close the doors on hundreds of thousands of small businesses, that's unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. How they changed the formula in this process to reward states like California that gets an additional $5.4 billion and the state of New York that gets $2.1 billion, It's unacceptable. And the fact that they rejected amendments from our colleagues, both in the House and the Senate, that said that this direct stimulus relief will not go to prisoners, they voted it down. And when there's amendments saying that this direct relief would not go to illegal immigrants, they voted it down. It's just like Bernie Sanders said. It's just like the chief of staff to the president says. This is a progressive wish list, dream come true, the largest progressive bill that's passed in a generation or in decades. You take the words from whichever one you want. This bill's a disaster. It's the wrong plan at the wrong time for all the wrong reasons in rewarding the Pelosi, Biden, Schumer political allies.
But you answered or anticipated my next question, because I'd be remiss not to point out that the formula that was adopted in the original bill and left intact in the Senate, I know cost my state over $500 million versus what we did together in the CARES Act. So anybody that thinks that this has not moved dramatically in a partisan direction just simply has to look at the formula that was adopted specifically to benefit blue states over red states. I find that regrettable. And we stuck with the formula we had. There might be more support for this. And then I look at things, any change in the bailout to multi-employer pension plans?
No, it's all still in there. So
did that have anything to do that you're aware of with COVID relief?
Not at all. Not at all. But that's just one of hundreds of items that are unrelated to crushing the virus. It's rewarding their friends and political allies.
We're spending over $130 billion to open schools. Any requirement that schools that actually get that money open?
Absolutely no requirement. In fact, it's projected that less than 5% of that money that's going to schools will actually be spent this year. And the money of that schools will be spent over the next decade. Is
there any more precision in the targeting of money that the Senate managed to put in? That was one of our concerns in the original bill.
Nope. Not at all.
That's what I thought. Well, again, I could go on, but Mr. Chairman, as you rightly point out, we've plowed this field before. I don't see any changes in the bill that change my position on it or likely to change my colleagues. And again, I congratulate Senator Sanders for being honest about what it is. The most liberal bill he's voted for, or progressive bill, to use his language, that he's voted for in his career. Fair enough. But let's call it what it is. It is indeed a liberal wish list, far more than it is a coronavirus relief bill. I will ask one point. Does my friend from Missouri happen to know how many jobs were created last month in this country, February?
There were over, I believe, 300,000.
379,000 jobs, more than double the estimate of 170,000, I think was the number. That was underway long before this relief bill was there. And I would also ask my friend, the 3 vaccines that are really what's going to get us out of this, were those already in existence before this bill will ever reach the president's desk?
They absolutely were. And people are being vaccinated. Our economy is turning around. And just like I stated, the CBO said not one additional dollar of money needs to be spent, and we will have the highest GDP later in this year than what we've had in 15 years, Mr. Cole.
I think that's exactly the concern of a lot of the liberal economists, that the recovery is underway and in a very smart fashion, that the vaccines are in place. Frankly, we have our own collective work last year in 5 bills, and what the Trump administration did to thank for that. Let's not pretend that this bill is going to be responsible for the recovery to come or for vanquishing the vaccine. That's already in place and that's already going on. What it will be responsible for is $2 trillion of additional debt on the backs of the American people. And it may well spark, and I hope it doesn't, frankly, but it may well spark an inflationary outburst that we haven't seen the likes of in a generation. It could undermine the prosperity of tens of millions of Americans. So those are our concerns, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. And can I just say, Mr. Cole, I want to say I do appreciate the fact that you pointed out that there are some things in this bill that some Republicans support. And as you know, there we have Republican mayors from Texas and Arizona and Florida, and even some from Oklahoma, who support this bill. And even though we disagree on how we're going to vote on this bill, I always appreciate the fact that you try to find common ground, and I think that that's important. And I say that because I think it's in sharp contrast to the testimony we just heard today from the ranking member. Because to be honest with you, listening to the ranking member, I'm not sure we can come to agreement on anything. I don't think we share the same values. And
Mr. Chairman?
I'll yield to the gentleman after I finish.
Thank you.
I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record this political argument that entitled "Check Partisanship at the Door: Biden Finds GOP Allies for Rescue Money." But I mean to say that people who are hungry or people who have lost their jobs and are struggling in this economy, or businesses that are closing, are somehow part of a political class, I find offensive, to be honest with you, because those are my constituents who are struggling. And to attack mayors and governors of states, by the way, Republican governors too, who have sought to protect people from getting this virus, from dying, that somehow that they should be punished. I don't get, but I don't want to dwell on the negative here. I did want to go back to the ranking member and saying, even though when we disagree, I always appreciate the gentleman's demeanor, and I appreciate his always trying to find the common ground, because you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. And I just wanted the record to reflect that. And if the gentleman from Missouri wants to say anything, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you questioned my desire to work together and to deliver for the working class and crushing this virus, I have said from day one that I would support legislation that would be used towards health spending and crushing the virus, and also delivering targeted relief and stimulus checks to the people who need it the most. Those are things that we all could have passed easily and bipartisan. If you look at my record, Mr. Chairman, I was one of probably 40 Republicans that voted for $2,000 checks directly to go to the working class. So I take great resentment from you saying that I'm not willing to work together. I gave you an alternative of what's there. Where I've had concerns with is the legislation that you take out the healthcare spending, you take out the targeted stimulus checks, and where the money's going to states like California that has a $10 billion surplus, and still they will be receiving the largest economic windfall from this package. That's where I have concerns, and I don't believe it's the proper use of American tax dollars. And because we disagree on that, don't say that I'm not willing to work together to deliver relief for the working class.
Yeah. Having listened to you, I think I can honestly say I don't think we share the same values. And so having said that, let me yield to Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for highlighting that we absolutely don't have the same values. Chairman Yarmouth, what part of the bill cuts senior funding? I mean, it's a ridiculous, obnoxious notion, to say that we are cutting seniors. It's an unfortunate remark, and I would like to yield to you so you can address that part of the issue, one issue.
I thank you for the question. We have something on the books called statutory pay-go, which under certain circumstances requires across-the-board cuts to some programs, including Medicare. That provision was in play when the Republicans cut taxes by $1.9 trillion in 2017. We knew at that point, and Senator McConnell and others made the comment, which is the same comment that I make now. It won't happen, it will never happen, it's never happened, and we won't let it happen. It unfortunately requires a separate piece of legislation to do it. Republicans proposed that in 2017. Democrats voted with them to change the statutory pay go, to waive statutory pay go so that those cuts wouldn't occur. We anticipate the same process being used now. Now, just because Republicans have said one thing in the past doesn't mean that they will live by it when the shoe's on the other foot. But I think we all can agree that we have a way to prevent those cuts to Medicare, and Republicans should want to join us to make sure those cuts don't happen.
Thank you, Chairman Yarmuth. I think that we are very clear that Democrats are not in the business of cutting benefits for the working poor, and we are not in the business of cutting benefits for our seniors. On the other hand, Republicans continue to capitulate to their gang of polluters, to their one percenters, billionaires, multimillionaires. You can laugh about it, Mr. Smith, but the bottom line is we have a bill in front of us that for the very first time recognizes hardworking parents and their need to pay for affordable childcare and the need for them to be able to pay for housing and food for their children. So to give them a tax break, finally, to recognize that the working poor, that our families that are struggling with their children, need this assistance. If that is so ridiculous for some of my colleagues, then go ahead and be on the record and vote the bill down, because we already know where you are and where you stand when it comes to families. I'm going to tell you where I stand when it comes to hardworking families and hardworking workers that have paid with their dear life to continue to provide food and healthcare and other assistance that we need so that we can continue to have a life and continue to be able to go to the grocery store and buy the food that we need. You see, when poor people face the reality of losing their lives or going to work to put food on the table for their family, they have chosen to go to work. On the other hand, when it comes to filthy rich people and the same issue is put before them, they hire people from my community to do their job so they don't have to expose themselves. So Republicans, might be okay to say, the lifespan of the working poor isn't worth saving. But I would say over 500,000 hardworking people have died in our country, And you stand there and continue to capitulate to your filthy, rich gang of polluters. I'm sorry that this is a too progressive of a bill for some of you. For me, it doesn't go far enough. A progressive bill would have had a $15 minimum wage increase. A very progressive bill would have had $2,000 into the direct payments into the pockets of every hardworking family in our community so that they can pay their rent. A progressive bill would not be reducing unemployment benefits for these people. I think you have to be pretty blind and completely out of touch, head in the sand, in order to not see the miles long food lines at the pantries in our communities. I see them every day. I see them from the front of my house every day when I'm home in California. And for those people that, hate California so much, you hate us because you ain't us, honestly. Small-minded to think, how small-minded are you to think that California, that has the population 6 times of Missouri, should get the same amount of money as the state of Missouri. I mean, how ridiculous is that? So, you know, if you're really interested in honesty and giving a fair chance to taxpayers, then you would keep your state from sucking up all of those tax dollars that California donates to you to feed your communities, to help you continue to fund those gang of polluters. But you don't do that because you don't care about the working class. You only care about your political class. And with that, I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure what I just heard, but Ranking Member Smith, so much of it didn't seem to be directed at you and the great state of Missouri. Look, do you have hardworking people in your district, Mr. Smith?
Let me tell you, every person who I represent is hardworking. To be a 1%er, Dr. Burgess in Southeast Missouri, you have to make more than $150,000 a year. I represent one of the poorest congressional districts, Dr. Burgess. While I was in college, I was one of the first in my family to graduate college. While I was in college, in order to wash my hands at my grandparents' house, I had to go outside and pump water out of a cistern because they had no running water. So the last thing I want is some elitist congressman from California tell me I don't know what poverty is or what working class is coming from my family. I'm telling you, this bill only rewards the Democrat socialist political class and not the working class of Southeast Missouri. So I take great offense from any congressman from an elitist area who's an elitist congressman going after me and not knowing what poor and working class is.
Well, and I suffice it to say that you don't feel that your district has a disproportionate number of, using the words of a previous member, the filthy rich in your district?
We definitely don't. And in fact, the chairman of the budget committee, when we were on the last rules panel, preceded over 150 millionaire CEOs who are all from New York City and New York State that supported this legislation. It tells you who this legislation supports. That's the big corporations and the political elite and the wealthy. We are not the party of the big corporations, the big political elite. We are the party of the working class.
Well, and I share your frustration. I'm fortunate enough to represent one of my principal counties in the district that I represent is the county in which I grew up. I've lived there for now almost 70 years and have watched it transform from a primarily rural agrarian county, largely subsistence farmers, not big agribusiness, but just people who raised what they needed to support their families and have a little bit to sell. We've now, of course, undergone a transformation because so many people leaving California and New York are moving to my district. And we are now, instead of growing crops in those fields, we now grow houses and neighborhoods, which is a good thing. They're good, solid neighborhoods. And certainly the people who have moved there are, for the most part, seem very reasonable and happy to be discovering the joys of North Texas that I've known all my life. But I vicariously took some offense at the comments that were just directed to you, because I know how hard you worked as a ranking member of the budget committee, how hard you worked. And look, whether you consider me fortunate or not, I am on a committee of jurisdiction that had a significant number of titles of this stimulus bill in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And then I got to talk about it again at the Budget Committee, and then I get to talk about it again at the Rules Committee the first time, and now the Rules Committee the second time, and I'll get to talk about it on the floor a little bit later today. So I feel fully invested in this. But Mr. Smith, I have to say, of all of my opportunities to speak about the bill, I think in your committee, you're the ranking member of the Budget Committee, and in your committee, perhaps one of the most honest and complete airings of both the pros and the cons of this bill occurred during unfortunately, it was a virtual hearing, but the hearing we had in the Budget Committee. And I just want to commend you, Ranking Member Smith, because I think you did an excellent job of keeping things on track and keeping people focused, keeping your membership focused on why we needed to be concerned about some of the things that were in this bill. And of all of the opportunities that I've had to see this bill, I think my time on and I'm a relatively new member of the Budget Committee, but I think my time on the Budget Committee was time that was well spent. Like everyone else, I'm frustrated by the lack of Republican input. Our Republican Doctors Caucus, our GOP Doctors Caucus, submitted 9 bills or 9 amendments to the Rules Committee based on bills that had previously been introduced by other members. These amendments were supported by all 15 members of the GOP Doctors Caucus. None of them was made in order. None of them was allowed to have a vote on the floor, but they were reasonable things, like allowing the FDA to use real-world evidence, putting additional money in the Provider Relief Fund. We say we're doing this bill to crush the coronavirus, and yet we're not giving our first-line healthcare providers the tools that they need to be able to do that. So there were a number of good ideas that were basically just discounted because this was going to be a partisan product from the get-go. There was no interest in having input from either committee Republicans or House Republicans during the crafting or the passage of this bill. I'd just point out what a difference a year makes. A year ago, we were sitting in this committee. That was back in the days we could all sit in the committee room, and thanks to the leadership of Mr. Cole, who on the very first coronavirus response bill said, wait a minute, there's no need to have this partisan exercise. We believe in putting the dollars forward to giving people the tools they need to beat this virus. And we did that with the bill the end of the first week in March. We did it with the bill the second week in March. We did it on the 27th of March in the CARES bill. And all of those bills, as Mr. Cole has pointed out, were bipartisan bills. So don't tell me that Republicans just won't work on these things. We did work on these things, and we worked in a bipartisan fashion. And in a relatively short period of time, we did the things that were required by the country to get us through the most difficult days of this virus. So please, I don't need any lectures from anyone on this committee or any other committee about how Republicans have simply blockaded the efforts. We participated. We were your partners in getting those first 3.5 coronavirus relief bills done. And again, it's thanks to the leadership of people like Mr. Cole on this subcommittee, Mr. Walden on Energy and Commerce Committee a year ago, and you, Mr. Smith, on the Budget Committee when you took the reins of that group. I remain frustrated because there are so many things that we could have discussed that actually would have made a difference. Again, look at the difference a year makes. We went from a place where no one knew anything about this virus to not having 1, but 2, but 3 vaccines that are all highly effective by anyone's measure. And that was the result of bipartisan work that was done in our authorizing committees, our appropriations committee, and yes, Mr. Chairman, I dare say in the Rules Committee. So it is truly unfortunate that we are where we are today with a bill that is has become such a partisan spectacle. Yes, it will pass because you have the votes to pass it. And let me predict, I know this, I can predict the vote tally for you on the Rules Committee because I pay attention when we count votes, and I recognize that we've got 4 on our side and a multiple of that on your side. So I know where the end result of this is going to be. But make no mistake, this could have been a much more inclusive process and an inclusive product. And it's truly a shame, given everything the country has been through in the past year, it's truly a shame that we could not muster the courage. And I think, Mr. Smith, you said the Democrats have achieved unity in one party, not the country. We could have achieved unity in the country over this bill. And what a great capstone that would have been to what I hope is the last chapter in this coronavirus saga. We are very close to the end. Mr. Smith, you pointed out the economy is poised to recover. The vaccines are working better than anyone thought that they could, and more of them are becoming available. Thanks, yes, to the Biden administration, but also to the Trump administration that secured the option to purchase more vaccines that the Biden administration is now exercising. I do worry about the effect of putting this many dollars into an economy that is already poised to recover. And for those who say that inflation has not reared its ugly head, have you bought a 2x4? Have you priced lumber? Have you priced cement? Have you priced steel recently? Those prices of those commodities have doubled in the last year's time, and they are only going higher. We are adding to that inflationary pressure by passing this partisan bill today. I thank everyone for their work on this product. I wish it could have had a different aspect to it. Unfortunately, that was not to be, but I will yield back my time.
Thank you. And Dr. Burgess, I'll put you down as undecided after that speech. Let me just say.
Are you trying to get me a primary opponent? What's the deal here?
Let me just urge all members to make sure that we don't call each other names as we proceed forward here. And I also just want to say for the record, because we're talking about working class and, you know, who gets helped and who's on whose side more. But I just want to point out for the record, because I think it is important, that this bill that is before us today is a stark contrast to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that my friends passed before. Over 70% of the tax benefits in what we're talking about here today, really do go to working families, to those of moderate income households and those in lower income households. By contrast, according to the Tax Policy Center, that's not me, over half of the benefits went to the top 5% in terms of income. And so we're putting our money where our mouth is. We actually mean what we say. And I think that's important. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a couple points. Joe Biden talked about this rescue plan for the last year, and America elected him. So obviously, a lot of people know that this is needed, support it. Mr. Yarmouth, and I missed your initial remarks, John, but you know, he's said in the past that 70% of Americans support this rescue plan because it's about the health, the physical, emotional, and financial health of America. And it's needed. I know it's needed in Colorado. It's needed elsewhere in the country. I yield to my friend, the chairman of the Budget Committee, for any remarks he might like to make. I want to say, as his classmate, very proud of the work you've done, sir. So if you have anything you want to share, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to keep this thing moving because we need to get it to the president and get it out to the people. John, you're muted.
I looked up a second ago and I wasn't muted. I thank my friend for giving me this opportunity and for his kind words. Let me say a few things. One is this notion that somehow red states are being disadvantaged under this bill. I look at Mr. Smith's state, for instance. Nearly 4 million people are going to receive relief checks. 1.5 million children in Missouri will benefit. 90% of people in Missouri will benefit in total. This is not a bill for millionaires at all. And I think this is why not just Bernie Sanders, but some prominent economists have said this is the most progressive bill in generations. Progressive because it does help low and moderate income people as opposed to wealthy individuals and corporations. I think in this bill, the number is only 4% of the money in this bill goes to businesses at all. Virtually, actually 0% goes to the richest Americans. But as was mentioned, 70% goes to low and moderate income. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this argument is Republicans say that they want the bill targeted. And yet what we did in making the state formula different was to say, we're going to give every state minimum $500 million. Everybody gets the same base. And then we create a formula based on unemployment, which makes sense because when you're paying unemployment funds, you're depleting your unemployment funds in each state. You need help in that way. So we actually tried to target the state share more appropriately than just basing it on population. And so the Republicans seem to want to have it both ways there. I don't think anybody would argue that I come from a blue state. We do have a Democratic governor, but we have two Republican senators, 5 out of 6 Republican House members, 75% of the legislature is Republican. And I'll guarantee you that my mayors, my county executives throughout Kentucky and the governor are thrilled with this bill. And they know how significant it's going to be for a red state. And my governor doesn't care whether it's a blue county or a red county. He's concerned that desperately needed funding is going to go to these areas. And one other thing that I can't help but say, this whole notion of partisanship versus of the last 3 bills, you have to mention the last 3 bills were done when Donald Trump was president. And now when we want to do almost exactly the same thing, again, Republicans have voted for almost all of these provisions when Donald Trump was president, but when Joe Biden's president, they can't find their way clear to do that. It says something about the disingenuousness of approach. And finally, just a couple of things about growth. I know Mr. Smith mentioned before that CBO said that if we didn't pass this bill, we would reach pre-pandemic levels of growth. Well, pre-pandemic levels of growth may sound good, but basically we were at 2% growth with pre-pandemic levels. We weren't burning things up. Goldman Sachs says after this bill, we can expect possibly 7.7% growth. The estimate of job growth under this plan, as President Biden has continued to point out, these are from experts like Moody's, say this bill will create 7 million new jobs that would otherwise not be created. So, and throwing out the employment figures, interesting, and I'm glad we created 345,000 new jobs last week. But do you know how many people filed for unemployment for the first time in February at the same time? 3 million. 3 million new unemployment claims in February alone versus 345,000 jobs created in February. So anybody who thinks we're out of the woods with the pandemic, that we don't have lots of work to do, that this bill is not appropriate to the needs of the nation, I think is using selective arguments and doesn't realize the pain and suffering that is going on throughout our country. So thank you again for giving me that opportunity, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Yarmouth. And I'll just finish by saying, look, the people know this is needed. It has unemployment, it has housing assistance, it has vaccine development and production, it has stuff for schools, it has what I really I'm happy about the state and local government. Colorado took a big hit. We have a lot of tourism. It's a big leisure industry, a lot of hospitality, and especially for restaurants, small businesses and restaurants. And that is going to make such a big difference, both in terms of our communities, but in terms of unemployment and putting people back to work. So, Mr. Yarmouth, Mr. Chairman, I'm very proud of this piece of legislation. And if we could get Republicans to join us, great. And if we can't, you know what? We're doing something good for the nation. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And I just have to say to Mr. Perlmutter, if you want to help out the economy, I'm still waiting for that invitation to ski out in Colorado. I'd love to come out and help your local economy for sure.
2 weeks.
Sounds good, Mr. Perlmutter. I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I would start off by associating my remarks, of course, with Ranking Member Tom Cole, with Ranking Member Jason Smith. I would associate my remarks with Dr. Burgess, but he was so bold as to predict the vote tally from this committee, and that's just a bridge too far for me. So, but on a serious note, Mr. Chairman, I think the most insidious part of this bill is that the economy is already improving. And the reason the economy is improving is really twofold. One, thanks to Operation Warp Speed, thanks to the prowess of the American pharmaceutical industry, we have 3 vaccines that are incredibly effective. And that, of course, is allowing states to reopen, which is the second reason why the economy is bouncing back, is because we're pushing back on these draconian lockdown orders, orders that hurt small businesses, that infringe on personal liberties and freedom. And if you just take that one step further, the far left will then use this spending bill to credit the economic comeback that's already occurring. They'll use this bill to then justify more government spending in a cycle. And what I'm really afraid of in the future is that academia will use this bill, will falsely cite this bill as something that's helping the economy, which again was already improving, and they'll use it to again push Keynesian economic theory more. Now, just to get back to economics, Ranking Member Cole had mentioned a few economists that are against this bill, and they're all liberal. But just to put it in context, what we're talking about, Larry Summers was the director of the council, director of the National Economic Council for President Obama. Clearly not a conservative, and he's against this. He thinks it's going to do economic damage. Steve Ratner, he was an Obama advisor. He's also against this. He thinks it's going to do damage. And then, of course, Stephen Pearlstein, who is with the Washington Post, not exactly the most conservative newspaper out there, all against it. So it's not like this has unification on even the left for thinking this is going to help. But with that said, Ranking Member Smith, I want to just hit upon what was discussed with the ratios. From my understanding, that not the ratios, the formulas were changed. Can you speak to that just briefly between the red state, blue state benefit? And additionally, if you could maybe mention the fact that in Ways and Means, it's my understanding that Representative Carol Miller had a formula that she put forth that was tied to childhood poverty rates, and how that may have helped get more support from the Republican side. With that, Mr. Smith, I yield to you.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. The formula that was changed, it was different than what was used in the prior bipartisan COVID packages. And by the simple formula changed, that used to just be based on population, that was the old formula change. This one was population and unemployment. You saw by just looking at the numbers, the 2 states with the biggest gains was California had the largest gain. And all I'm saying is that from the old formula to this formula, by that formula change, the state of California will get an additional $5.4 billion. I'm not talking about what they already will get based on their population. I know there was some prior discussion about, well, a state that's 6 times your population, Missouri, it should get more. Well, yeah, that's the case. However, this formula changes it for other factors that would, in addition to population, would give them $5.4 billion more. The number 2 winner in the whole process is the state of New York. That would gain 2.1, which the biggest losers happens to be like Florida, Virginia, South Carolina, Alabama, Indiana, Ohio. Missouri loses $820 million off the change. Iowa, Utah, North Carolina, Nebraska, Kansas. You see a common similarity that it's the majority concentrated from states that conservatives have been running their government. So it's just facts that I'm just pointing out. That why didn't we stay with the old formula? It worked fine on the last one. Why change it this time?
And what about the formula that Representative Carol Miller put forward? I know that's not your committee, but could you speak to that at all, where you would link the formula to childhood poverty rates?
Yeah, I mean, if you're wanting to address childhood poverty, that's a great addition. I mean, that's what I said earlier, is that we support targeted relief to actually help the most. The state of California has a $10 billion surplus. $10 billion surplus. And yet they're receiving 5.4 in addition what they would have in the prior formula when they didn't even have a deficit last year. So it should be targeting. Should be targeting the people that need it. And that's what Republicans have been arguing the whole time.
And Chairman Smith, I'm sorry, Ranking Member Smith, Chairman Yarmouth said when he was testifying that the process went incredibly well, that it was a smooth process. And in fact, I think there was a lot of praise for the process. But to my recollection, this bill did not go through either or any of the three committees of jurisdiction. There was basically what I'm saying is there was no markup. Additionally, in the Senate, this was only debated for 3 hours. The bill itself was held open. The vote on the bill itself was held open for 12 hours. So think about that. The voting window was 12 hours. The vote was held open literally 4 times longer than the actual bill was debated. Could you just speak to the process and how you think that this actually did not go through the proper channels and was not fully debated?
Congressman, there's so many different areas that you could criticize the process. I think the biggest thing is that this bill was virtually written behind closed doors, because on the House side, there were over 250 amendments offered by Republicans, and only 2 were accepted. And in fact, those 2 were cut out in this committee, in the Rules Committee. And so there weren't any Republican amendments. So the bill that has been done was brought forward by leadership, I guess. And so that has really cut out the whole process of a legislative body, adding amendments and changing. And so I think both sides should be disappointed that amendments weren't offered, and most of it was crafted behind closed doors and decided what was going to happen. When you're looking at over on our side, the budget resolution that started this reconciliation bill, for the first time in the history of the Budget Control Act, did a budget that originates from the House bypass the Budget Committee. It absolutely bypassed. We weren't even organized as a Budget Committee, and it was just sent directly to the floor. That's the first time that a House budget resolution that originated from the House since 1974, since the Budget Act was created, that they completely bypassed the entire House Budget Committee. That's just horrible process. And then in the Senate, it's a whole different disaster. They bypassed the committee process in the Senate and took it straight to the floor. So I don't think that's how you need to be doing government, but.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I need to clarify something. I said that the vote on the bill was held open for 12 hours. I misspoke. I was referencing the amendment on the $15 minimum wage, which was held open for 12 hours. But again, it just reinforces my point that an amendment vote was held open for 12 hours. The debate on the underlying bill was only 3 hours. So clearly that's incredibly lopsided. So with that, thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yeah, and I'm happy, by the way, to yield to Mr. Cole. He wants to. I just kind of feel like I have to respond to the process issue here a little bit, because in terms of reconciliation, this has actually been a very good process, and I think some of the people here were around when the Republicans tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and we had, as I recall, 4 Rules Committee meetings to consider several rewrites of the bill that were done behind closed doors in the dark of night. Then, if I remember correctly, the Republican majority self-executed 8 Republican amendments over the course of that long saga just to get the bill over the finish line. None of these amendments, and if my Democratic colleagues recall differently, let me know, but none of these amendments had any input from Democrats. In some cases, we had less than an hour to review the text that impacted the ability of Americans to access health care. So, and now you're here criticizing a transparent, a professionally run process to deliver aid to struggling families. I mean, give me a break. You know, I mean, I just say that because it just is, it's kind of jarring to hear my friends characterize this process. I mean, which is for reconciliation. I think it went pretty damn well. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that. But if not, I'll move on.
Mr. Chairman, just
Mr. Cole.
quickly,
Yeah.
and there's a great deal you say. Actually, I do agree with. I don't have. You chose the process. I don't have any complaints about the process that's been chosen. I think it was a mistake to choose this process. I don't think it was a necessary thing. I think the 5 previous bills indicate that we could have worked together, would have gotten to a good place because we did. This process has limitations. You use it when you can't go another direction. In this case, I think, my view, the administration made that decision early. I think the speaker made that decision early. And I think this is a lot more than a coronavirus relief bill because of that. So let's dispense with the idea that what we're doing here is passing a relief bill. There are elements of a relief bill in here, no question about it. We would all agree on the viruses. A number of us would agree on the additional checks to individuals. But there's a lot in here that really has nothing to do with coronavirus relief and has been added on. And that's where the rub comes in. Once I think the bills that we had previously, the 5, were primarily focused on coronavirus relief and economic recovery in a way that we broadly agreed on. And again, I point out those bills collectively were roughly twice the size of what we're dealing with today. So I think, but I don't disagree with you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the operation of a reconciliation process.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I just felt I had to respond to that. And again, this is at the end of the day, this is not about process. It's about, it's about helping people. So I now yield to Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 is the cause for great celebration all across America right now, which is why commanding numbers of Americans, huge majorities, are supporting it. After 4 years of policy chaos and top-down economic warfare by billionaire Donald Trump of New York City and his billionaire buddies on Wall Street, we are putting the government back on the side of the American people. And this is cause for tremendous celebration. 77% of the American people support the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And even when the entirely predictable and tiresome complaints are issued that this is a Democrat plan by Democrat members and it's partisan and blah, 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 the numbers only go down to 71%, which means still the vast majority of Americans understand we need this massive investment in America to recover from the catastrophe of COVID-19 and the lethally irresponsible and reckless policies of the Trump administration. And we are going to put America back on track with this legislation, despite all of the whining and negativity of people who have forfeited their right to lecture to us because of their collaboration with Donald Trump and his lethally irresponsible and reckless policies, including hawking fake medical cures to the American people. So we've got a real plan that is investing in a national vaccination program, a national testing and contact tracing program. We've got $130 billion put into getting our students, our teachers back to work so we can get schools up and running again, so people are not afraid to go out because they understand that America's got a real plan and a real program to get back to work. There is investment in every part of the society that needs help because of the desperation that has grown up over the last 4 years, the tens of millions of unemployed people, the hungry people, the people who can't pay their rent, the landlords who can't pay their mortgages because the tenants can't pay their rent. We've got a plan here for all of it, and we are reinvesting in America and in the real working class of America, the working families of America. I'd be very nervous if I were some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle reminding people that this is, quote, a partisan plan. It's only partisan because they won't support it, despite the fact that the vast majority of the American people will support it. In fact, this is a bipartisan, transpartisan, multi-partisan, nonpartisan plan to put America back to work and to crush the disease. And the only people I see who are railing about it are Republicans in Washington, D.C., who don't like the fact that we are on the path to rebuilding America and revitalizing our economy and our society. One can only regard with astonishment and amazement the ranking member's solemn assurance that his is the party of the working class when their comparable legislation was a massive giveaway to the richest people in the country, a massive tax giveaway to the richest people in America. That's amazing to me. I don't know who their exemplar is of the working class. Certainly it can't be Donald Trump, the billionaire who won't pay his bills, which is why he's got thousands of lawsuits by electricians and painters and small business contractors and plumbers like my grandfather. These are the people he doesn't pay, and that is their real attitude towards the working class. And it's also evident this week with their opposition to legislation to allow working people to organize in the workplace. And of course, while they are claiming that they are the party of the working class, they're doing everything they can to crush the ability of working people to organize into unions, which created the middle class in America, like the steel workers union, like the mine workers union, like the teachers union. All of the unions of the working class, which they oppose, are the ones that built the middle class in America. So I don't think anybody is buying this new charade, this new counterfeit scheme of trying to dress up the party of the economic royalists as the working class. Everybody understands if you support working people, you're going to support the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, this massive investment to bring America back from the nightmare of COVID-19. And I would just want to ask Mr. Yarmouth specifically, there's a lot of concern among my constituents about what is being done to help people in terms of the housing sector and in terms of assistance to people who are paying rent and to the landlords who depend on rent that people have not been able to pay.
Well, there's, I believe the number is $37 billion in the bill to help keep people in their homes. And let's see, yeah, there's $27.5 billion for emergency rental assistance. That's to help struggling families continue to have a safe place to live. There's $10 billion to help homeowners struggling to afford their housing. And there's an additional $4.75 billion for state and local governments through the Home Investment Partnership Program to finance supportive services. So there's, let's see, there's also $5 billion to those most in need to help pay their utility bills. So all told, there's about $47 billion in 4 different programs to help people stay in their homes.
Well, that's going to mean a lot to people in my district, which has been very hard hit. Obviously, so many millions of people who could not work, who were thrown out of work because of the coronavirus and the inability or unwillingness of the last administration to do anything to create an economic plan. And that has caused tenants to suffer. It's caused landlords to suffer. Then they've not been able to pay the mortgages on their buildings, and that has an effect on the banking sector. We've got to bring all America back. And I'm just really delighted that you have done this hard work. I'm disappointed that our friends in Washington won't come along with us, but when they say it's a partisan plan, I say on the contrary, it's a bipartisan plan, because people all over the country across party lines are supporting this legislation, and America's moving in the right direction. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Fishbach. You got to unmute, I think, yeah. Okay. Was unmute or speak louder. Huh? Okay. What? Why don't you? Maybe I should go to Ms. Scanlon and come back to you. Is that okay? Okay. All right, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Chairman. I really don't feel like I've got a lot to add to the conversation at this point. I mean, we've heard our colleagues' talking points now for in excess of 11 or 12 hours. They haven't changed much, and I'm no more persuaded by them now than I was at the outset. I know my district is looking forward with great relief to passage of this package because, you know, for the hundreds of thousands of people who are still out of work, for the children in our country's poorest city who will get relief through expansion of the child tax credit, for the 500,000 restaurant workers in the Philadelphia region who've been suffering over the last year. This is important for all of them. You know, the fact that it's not bipartisan, shame on those who won't even come to the table over it. We've had months and months of waiting for this. These bills or the various component parts of the bills have been discussed in the press, in the halls of Congress for months and months and months. And if you couldn't get anything through the Senate for all that time, then, you know, we've got to do it now. So with that, I yield back.
Yeah, Ms. Fish.
Ms. Fishbach, are we working yet or? Okay, then I'll go to Mr. Desagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just very briefly want to say how much I appreciate Mr. Raskin's comments. To me, this is about helping the American people, particularly those people who are struggling, and that's poor people and middle-income people. And I get the new speaking points from my colleagues on the other side that they somehow magically represent these people. And it's difficult to hear, to be honest, with all due respect, this Randian belief that only a few people should know what's in the best interest of working people and people who struggle to get by on minimum wage. So I felt compelled to say that. To me, this is not a perfect piece of legislation, but it is going to provide really important relief to people who are struggling. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to go to Ms. Ross, and then we'll go to Ms. Fishbach to close up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not going to take a lot of time. I do want to focus on a couple of things, and maybe Mr. Yarmouth could provide us a little bit more information. There were a few things that the Senate did that I wasn't personally happy with. One of those things was reduce the amount of unemployment benefits, because North Carolina provides some of the most paltry unemployment benefits in the country for the shortest period of time. But I'm definitely in favor of this package for so many other reasons, including the expanded amount of Medicaid coverage that states like mine, which haven't expanded Medicaid, that we would be able to receive, again, more than $2 billion over a 2-year period if we do that, help for the restaurants, help to get more vaccines and more testing. We've been hearing all about how this virus is over. Well, we know that there are variants. We know that certain people are not going to be able to get the vaccines as quickly. And we know that some people who even have vaccines end up getting coronavirus again. And so we're going to need to expand that testing. I did notice, though, that the Senate added some money for emergency rental assistance and for the homeowner assistance fund and for homeless students. And so, Mr. Yarmouth, could you tell us a little bit about those negotiations? I see those as positives.
There were positives. Thank you for the question. And another thing that the Senate did was increase the subsidy for COBRA premium assistance from 85% to 100%. Because we know, if you're talking about insurance premiums of $20,000 or $25,000 a year, 15% of that becomes unaffordable for many people. So under this bill, under the Senate changes, they were able to do that. I think that's a positive change. I personally agree with you on the $400 versus $300 federal supplement, although we were able to extend it into September, which is a positive trade-off as well. So yes, there were a number of things that the Senate added that I think are not only helpful to our citizens, but helpful to our economic, in terms of their situation currently, but also in terms of helping the economy recover as we get past the pandemic. So yes, not all the changes in the Senate were bad changes.
Well, thank you for that answer. I have a question about one other Senate change, because it is directly related to the problems that we've had in North Carolina, because we didn't expand Medicaid yet. And that's with our rural hospitals, and we've lost several of our rural hospitals. And I noticed that there's provider relief in section 9911 that creates an $8.5 billion fund for rural providers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's exactly right. $8.5 billion to Medicare and Medicaid rural providers. And we know that there's constantly a problem with reimbursement, and we have so many rural providers who have suffered dramatically under this because of the pandemic, seeing far more patients and getting far less compensation than they need to keep going. So I think this was a very, very positive effort to take care of both of the additional expenses and also the lost revenue that they have experienced under COVID-19.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Chairman, I am delighted to support this bill, and the people of North Carolina, by more than 20 percentage points, favor this bill in a purple state. And so I just cannot wait to vote for it on the floor. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fishbach, how's that? Is it working?
Mr. Chair, I think we've got it working. I just moved locations and relocated the witness table.
So you're our closer. Take us home.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And first of all, I just wanted to thank Ranking Member Cole for the questions that he asked at the beginning of the question series, because I think that he made some very good points and brought out some of the details about the bill that as it's returned from the Senate. I do have, I just wanted to ask Ranking Member Smith, I believe that it is the case that this did not come back. There are no hide protections. It left the House with no hide protections. And it's my understanding it's come back that way. And maybe Ranking Member Smith could just talk a little bit about that and how Planned Parenthood is treated in the bill.
That's correct. No amendments were accepted. As you all know, we offered several amendments over on the House side to continue with the hide protections, and they were all rejected along straight party vote. The Democrats would not allow that amendment, and so there are no protections for hide in this piece of legislation.
All right, well, and I just wanted to, Ranking Member Cole did ask some of the questions that I was going to, so I appreciate understanding what's going on, and that was one that I just wanted to make sure that we had clarified. And you know, I really am, I'm really disappointed that we're back in this position, not even 2 weeks later, since the majority last forced this $2 trillion spending package through, and with no input from the Republicans, and just a whole lot of spending that has nothing to do with COVID relief. And it is chock full of progressive wish list items, and it really does fail to adequately address the real needs of Americans to safely reopen the economy and to get our kids back in school. And so I can't in good conscience support this legislation. And or the process, the hurried process that we've got it here to this point. And so Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Does any other member of the committee wish to ask a question? Seeing none, I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony. Now excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other members who wish to, thank you. Are there any other members who wish to testify on Senate Amendment to HR 1319? Seeing none, that closes our hearing. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the very distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and it's not nearly as long as the rule we read yesterday. So, Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant a rule providing for the consideration of the Senate amendment to HR 1319, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. The rule makes an order a motion offered by the chair of the committee on the budget or his designee that the House concur in the Senate amendment to HR 1319. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the motion and the Senate amendment. The rule provides that the Senate amendment and the motion shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides 2 hours of debate equally divided among and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the committee on the budget or their respective designees, and the chair and the ranking minority member of the committee on Ways and Means or their respective designees.
You heard the motion from the gentleman from Colorado. Is there any amendment or discussion?
Just quickly,
Mr.
Mr.
Cole.
Chairman, I want to associate myself with your decision to leave the hard rules to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania and give the easy rules to the gentleman from Colorado. I think that was a very wise decision and draws support from both sides of the aisle.
I appreciate the compliment. All right, so hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from Colorado. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, all those opposed will say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I would request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
Aye.
Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter,
Aye.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin,
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Ms. Scanlon,
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli, Mr. DeSaulnier,
Aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross,
Aye.
Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Cole,
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess,
No.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler,
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach,
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, I will manage it for the majority
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Burgess will manage it for the Republic.
and Mr. Burgess will manage for Republicans. I think that we're being told that this may be on the floor around 2:30 or 2:45 today. So for planning purposes, I hope that's helpful. In any event, that concludes our meeting today. Thank you all, and the Rules Committee stands adjourned.